Good evening, everyone. I'm Stephanie Ramos in for Lindsay Davis. Thank you so much for streaming with us on War with Iran. We begin with the U.S. now deploying an additional 2,200 Marines to the Middle East, leading some to speculate of a possible ground operation inside Iran. But tonight, President Trump claiming the administration is very close to, quote, meeting their objectives and is considering winding down military efforts. Iranian drones hit a Kuwaiti oil refinery overnight, and Saudi Arabia is warning oil prices could soar to $180 a barrel. Gas prices in the U.S. are now up 30% since the start of the war. Strikes also continuing near the Strait of Hormuz, while President Trump says the strait will, quote, open itself at a certain point. Meanwhile, here in the U.S., a mystery drone threat at a military base home to B-52 bombers and the Air Force's nuclear command. But first, here's Chief International Correspondent James Longman in northern Iraq tonight.
U.S. officials tell ABC News tonight thousands more U.S. Marines are headed to the Middle East as the Trump administration weighs options on how to reopen the critical Strait of Hormuz. New video shows the USS Boxer and two more massive Navy amphibious ships leaving San Diego, at least 2,200 Marines on board. It's the second deployment of a Marine Expeditionary Unit just in the last week, equipped with ground forces, fighter jets, Ospreys and attack helicopters. With the US already striking more than 7,000 targets inside Iran, this deployment is sparking escalation. Those Marines could conduct ground operations. Options include seizing Iran's Karg Island, the hub of the country's oil economy, or carrying out raids on the Iranian coastline to try to force Iran to reopen the dangerous Strait of Hormuz. Tonight, the White House says there is no plan to send ground troops anywhere at this time, but President Trump hasn't ruled out putting boots on the ground. And late today, the president was asked if he has a plan for Iran's Karg Island.
Well, you know, I may have a plan or I may not, but how would I ever say that to a reporter? If I said that to a reporter, Marco would say, please, sir, let's bring you over to the helicopter immediately, right? No, I can't tell you that. It's certainly a place that's people are talking about, but I can't say yeah.
Tonight, the president blasted Americans' NATO allies, calling them cowards for not helping to secure the strait. Trump saying they complain about the high oil prices they're forced to pay, but don't want to help open the Strait of Hormuz. But many of those American allies have signaled they did not start this war and they weren't consulted before President Trump launched it nearly 3 weeks ago. Tonight, the president says the Strait of Hormuz could be opened with a, quote, simple military maneuver.
It's a simple military maneuver. It's relatively safe, but you need a lot of help in the sense of you need ships, you need volume.
Tonight, French President Emmanuel Macron says France is ready to help escort ships passing through the strait once the situation calms down. Iran tonight continuing its retaliation. An explosion in the heart of Jerusalem's Old City. Smoke billowing into the sky. You see the moment of impact sending debris shooting into the air. Several people have been reportedly injured by missile shrapnel.
I looked up and suddenly I saw a cannonball just falling above me.
Our Tom Sufi Burridge is there.
Well, you can see the force of the blast from those missile fragments. We heard the thud from our hotel. We're in the Jewish quarter in the Old City, just yards away from some of the holiest sites in the world.
Tonight, the global oil shockwaves. Oil is now hovering around $108 a barrel. Gas prices in the US are up nearly $1 since Trump launched the war, $3.92 per gallon. And tonight, the new numbers from the Pentagon. We're now learning at least 232 US troops have been injured, 10 of them seriously, the majority suffering traumatic brain injuries. 13 US service members have been killed. And a US-based monitoring group says at least 1,300 Iranian civilians have been killed and more than 1,100 military personnel. Allah. And tonight, all over the world, millions of Muslims marking the end of Ramadan and the Persian New Year. Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, who still hasn't been seen publicly since he was injured in the same attack that killed his father, has claimed to be behind a new defiant statement. He called the US strategy flawed and says it's backfiring. Late today, leaving the White House for Mar-a-Lago, the president was asked about Pope Leo, who's calling for a ceasefire.
Well, look, we can have dialogue, but I don't want to do a ceasefire. You know, you don't do a ceasefire when you're literally obliterating the other side.
Our thanks to James Longman. As this war rages on, fractures emerging between the U.S. and Israel. Trump lashing out at Israel for strikes on an Iranian oil field as Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is on the defense, saying Israel did not leave the U.S. into this war.
Well, I misled no one, and I didn't have to convince President Trump about the need to prevent Iran from developing its nuclear program, putting it underground, and being able to launch nuclear-tipped missiles at the United States.
Even the director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, telling Congress the U.S. and Israel have very different goals in Iran. So what is the current state of the relationship between the two nations? Here's what the former U.S. ambassador to Israel had to say to our Kira Phillips.
Clearly, the war is escalating very quickly. It's expanding. And now the administration is floating ideas of putting troops on the ground in Karg. What do you make of that?
I think President Trump has reached a very difficult juncture of this war. He had an off-ramp perhaps in week 2 when he could have claimed victory, said we had degraded Iran's main power projection capabilities, ballistic missiles, drones, the Navy, et cetera, and declared that the war is over. But now that the Strait of Hormuz is being blocked by Iran, and that's creating a global energy crisis, he has less appealing options. One of them is still to try to declare victory, but the Iranians may not open the strait, and they may continue to fire at Israel, at Gulf states, at U.S. forces, and then he's going to have to use some sort of military means and maybe some combination of diplomacy to try to unstick the strait. The other option is a full-on naval mission to unblock the strait. That's going to take weeks. To assemble the necessary forces, recruit allies, bring in the minesweepers, suppress the threats on the shore. It might include taking Karg Island as part of that, but that's a multi-week military mission and means the energy crisis that's plaguing the globe is only going to get worse.
Well, and we know troops are on the way right now. We've been reporting that as of this morning. All right, I want to ask you about Trump's top counterterrorism official, Joe Kent, who, as you know, resigned last week. He said, look, in good conscience here, I'm going to be honest, I'm out of here. He went on to say that the U.S. was dragged into this war by Israel and its powerful American lobby. Does he have a point?
No, I don't think that's a reasonable explanation for why we're in this war. The President of the United States has agency. The President of the United States made his own decision that it was in the U.S. national interest to go to war. It coincided, obviously, with a long-standing Israeli advocacy for its own military action and to do it together with the United States. But the President of the United States owns that decision. If you disagree with it, and obviously Mr. Kent does, you should take him on. But to apply what, from Mr. Kent's perspective, and including some of his historical statements, a kind of broad conspiracy theory that there's this shadowy lobby, and it's obviously Israel itself, but also American supporters of Israel, often means the American Jewish community. That really, I think, is an unreasonable interpretation of why we're in this situation.
Do you have an opinion to why you think he is saying these things? I mean, this is a guy with a pretty stellar reputation, was part of the CIA, he knows intelligence very well. He actually has a history of fairly extreme statements, including some anti-Semitic statements. So I don't want to speak for what his motivations are. But I do think it bespeaks a challenge President Trump faces. There are a lot of people in his political base, from the MAGA base, including people with extreme views, but that's not everybody in that base, obviously, who listened to him when he said, we're not going to do any more Middle East regime change wars. We're not going to be putting troops on the ground in the Middle East. We're not going to be sucked into a repeat of what we experienced in Iraq and Afghanistan. And obviously, Mr. Kent experienced combat in that area. He lost his spouse in that area. So I understand why he feels it deeply. But now a lot of those same supporters of President Trump are looking at this situation and saying, why are we here? When we got into the war 3 or 4 weeks ago on that Saturday morning, I was in Israel at the time, so I was a few hours ahead of Washington. But most Americans woke up that morning and were shocked to discover we're in the war in the Middle East. Where did that come from? So why do you think, with your experience, your background, that we're in this war?
There are legitimate security threats that Iran presents. Obviously, there was the nuclear threat. Hasn't been completely removed either, but that was largely dealt with, or at least significantly set back, by the 12-day war last June, including by the U.S. strikes on the underground facilities. Israel felt, and I think reasonably, that there was still a major problem with the ballistic missile threat. They showed during that war, the 12-day war, that ballistic missiles at sufficient scale can penetrate even Israel's excellent air defenses, and even when the U.S. supports them in that. And Israel had seen plans for Iran to significantly expand the production of those ballistic missiles to the point where it really could become a strategic threat. So Israel had some plan to do that at some point this year. I think President Trump was aware of that and was probably prepared to support that, if not participate in it. Then came the protests in January when the Iranian people went to the streets. President Trump, fresh off his success of removing Maduro from Venezuela and feeling...
He supported those protesters.
And that's what he did. He called for them to go to the streets, said, we've got your back, threatened a price if the Iranian regime crushed them. Well, they did crush them, killed thousands, maybe tens of thousands of them. And then he was left needing to feel like he responded. Didn't have the forces he needed in place to respond and then be prepared to deal with a blowback, brought a much bigger force to the region throughout February. And once you put a force like that in place, you either use it or you have to bring it home. And then I think the timelines of this got very scrambled, and it meant that we got caught in a war that really hadn't been properly prepared. And now we're stuck with the back end of that, not having planned for a closure of the Strait of Hormuz and these very difficult choices that could probably lead to a longer war no matter which choice the president takes.
Our thanks to Kira and the team for that. Coming up, just how strong is Iran's nuclear capacity? How concerned should the world be? We spoke with an expert who is a former Nobel Peace Prize physician. That's coming up next. Welcome back. Questions are mounting from the international community over what are Iran's intentions to rebuild and to continue to grow their nuclear enrichment capability. Earlier today, the former president of International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War and recipient of the 1985 Nobel Peace Prize joined our Alex Prochet to discuss.
I want to start with his testimony that we saw from DNI Gabbard. She testified on Wednesday that Iran made no efforts to rebuild its nuclear enrichment program. There's this debate over whether they're an imminent threat. Gabbard says only the president can determine that. What say you, sir?
Well, I think it was quite clear from Gabbard's testimony that Iran was not an immediate threat. Iran perhaps they would have become a threat in the future, but they clearly weren't a threat right now. And this is unquestionably a war of choice that we did not need to enter into. And it's a very dangerous war, which is increasing the chance that nuclear weapons will actually be used. You know, we'd certainly hope that in the current situation, we wouldn't need to worry about this. Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. There's no rational reason for Israel or the United States to use them. But there have been an awful lot of very irrational decisions around this war so far. And it's not clear that we are out of the woods in this regard.
Well, and Gabbard also said that the U.S. and Israel have different objectives here. Does that concern you?
Not particularly. I mean, I think we have two leaders, both of whom have shown a willingness to skirt the norms of international behavior. And the fact that they're not even in accord with each other, I guess, is somewhat worrying. But the thing that really worries me is the possibility that this will escalate. I mean, what happens, for example, if the United States hits another school, if Iran hits a civilian target in Israel, if Iran hits a major petroleum facility, or if the United States can't open the Hormuz Strait? Will one side or the other escalate things further, and will that escalation lead to the use of nuclear weapons? And it's not just the situation that we're in right now. This conflict, I think, illustrates how incredibly dangerous the entire world has become. In the last year, 5 of the 9 countries which have nuclear weapons have been engaged in active warfare. Russia and Ukraine, the United States and Israel in Iran twice, and India and Pakistan against each other. And any one of these has the potential to escalate to a nuclear conflict. We are acting as though that danger didn't exist, and we can't do that anymore. We have to break the denial and recognize that we are closer to nuclear war than we've ever been, that the current policy of all 9 countries which have nuclear weapons is really nothing more than a hope for good luck, that we won't stumble into a war, and that we need to do something very different. The 9 countries that have these weapons need to sit down and figure out how they can eliminate these weapons before our luck runs out.
Our thanks to Alex Prochet and the team for that. Joining us tonight is Emmy, Peabody, and DuPont winning journalist Sebastian Walker, who was recently in Iran. Sebastian, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Later this month, PBS Frontline will be airing an updated version of your documentary, Strike on Iran, The Nuclear Question. Notably, as part of that documentary, you sat down with top Iranian security official Ali Larijani, who Iran confirmed was killed in an Israeli airstrike just this week.
Can you say definitively here now, after the strikes, that Iran has no intention of developing a nuclear weapon?
نداشتیم هیچ وقت. چندین بار اعلام کردیم.
That interview in September of last year, 6 months before his death. What were some of your biggest takeaways after sitting down with him?
You know, one of the takeaways from that conversation was just his insistence that Iran's nuclear program could never be destroyed. That was one of the points that he made to us. He obviously was clear in that bite that you just played that, you know, from their perspective, this was a peaceful program, that they weren't intending to build a weapon, but the knowledge, the expertise, and the technology required to have nuclear ambitions was certainly something that he was insisting Iran would continue with.
And what was your reaction when you learned about his death?
He was seen as, you know, a seasoned negotiator, diplomat. He had very good connections with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. You know, without that kind of a figure who's able to speak on behalf of the government, who's able to keep, you know, different factions on the same page, it might be more complicated to have a conversation about a deal, potentially.
And you mentioned that sit down with the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency. What did he share with you, if anything?
The IAEA has insight into the nuclear program in various countries around the world. It's not just Iran, but he's really most concerned with the reduced visibility. His inspectors aren't getting, you know, access to the sites that they would normally have if there wasn't, you know, a conflict ongoing. So he's concerned about this moment that we're in, the fact that you are not getting the same amount of information that they used to about what's going on with the nuclear program, meaning that there is now a kind of knowledge gap, which means that there is less oversight and potentially more risk of, you know, a nuclear escalation in this moment as opposed to when we last spoke to him.
After spending so much time in Iran and seeing the regime up close, do you think the Islamic regime can keep an iron grip on the country?
Essentially, we were limited in what we could see and where we could go. But it was certainly a moment where you sensed that the government, the authorities had been hit in an unprecedented way. They, you know, the strikes in June last year were surprising to everyone, surprising to a lot of Iranians. And what we did hear from people that we met was, you know, surprise that there were, you know, Israel and the US were able to hit Iran in such a way. There were conversations that I had in the locations of, you know, apartments where nuclear scientists were assassinated, where they were really kind of angry about the fact that these officials had been living, you know, in a residential building. So there was a sense that this was something that had really impacted, you know, the sense of safety for Iranians in Tehran.
It truly is a fascinating documentary, and it airs again. Is that correct? March 31st on PBS?
Yep, March 31st. This is going to be an updated film, including all of the latest developments on the ground and our interview with Rafael Grossi as well, the latest one.
Fantastic work. Sebastian, thank you very much for your time and for your insights and for sharing with us your experience there in Iran. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, planes, trains, automobiles, not with these gas prices, but what can you do to save some money right now? We'll tell you after the break. The International Energy Agency is giving consumers, governments, and businesses tips on how to alleviate those high gas prices. So what do they suggest? Gas Buddy's petroleum analyst spoke with ABC News Live first anchor Diane Macedo. Take a listen.
So U.S. oil is around $95 a barrel this morning. Brent crude is at about $108. How significant are these jumps, and how high do you expect these prices to go?
Yeah, Diane, as you mentioned in that previous segment, near record-setting pace. Now, when you look at it, diesel prices are up nearly $1.50 a gallon from just a month ago. Gasoline prices up nearing $1 a gallon from a month ago. This is costing the economy now roughly $575 million every day compared to a month ago. So these costs are starting to add up. Many states are starting to get very close to that $4 mark. The national average could hit that as early as next week. And there's really no signs of it potentially slowing down just yet as the situation continues to escalate. Oil prices falling a little bit today, but that may be a bit of a headwind or at least a fake out as the contract does expire today. Brent crude oil resuming its increase. All of this is going to translate to a continued rise in gasoline and diesel prices. And beyond the Middle East situation, still the seasonality pushing prices up as well. The change to summer gasoline, which President Trump has talked about potentially waiving, increasing demand as travelers start getting out for spring break travel, and refinery maintenance, all boosting prices right now.
Qatari officials say Iran's missile attacks knocked out 17% of its liquefied natural gas export capacity. They're estimating that'll cost $20 billion in lost revenue and could take up to 5 years to repair. How serious is that loss, and what does it mean for international gas supplies?
Yeah, no, it's extremely serious. When you talk about these attacks, it does take a considerable amount of time to get this output back online, rebuilding it. The same with refineries that have been attacked in the Middle East. It's extremely problematic. These things aren't rebuilt overnight. It can take time to resume output. So at this point, we likely are looking at an impact that could last beyond several months when it comes to natural gas, gasoline, diesel, jet fuel. This is becoming far more problematic every day this continues.
What else can Americans do right now to try to help alleviate these high fuel costs?
Well, certainly fuel efficiency is a big part of this. As the IEA had mentioned in that graphic you had shown earlier, driving more fuel efficiently is a big part of this. Americans can slow down a bit. Keep in mind, this is why the federal government reduced speed limits back during the Arab oil embargo in the 70s. Trying to cut down on speed, reducing acceleration can go a long way to increasing your fuel efficiency. Motorists can also shop around using smartphone apps like Gas Buddy, Google Maps, and Waze for lower prices. Combining grocery store discounts that are offered at the pump, wholesale clubs have lower prices as well. Fuel rewards programs can generally reduce prices by 5 to 10 cents a gallon as well. So there's plenty Americans can do to reduce the impact of these near record-setting increases.
Our thanks to Diane Macedo for that conversation. And that is our show for this half hour. I'm Stephanie Ramos. Stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. Thank you for streaming with us.